Hey family, we're doing some video of some of the things that have happened in our life, and so we're going to kind of do a bunch of videos that talk about some of the crazy things that either God has done in our life or the crazy things that we have done for God. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want to pass on the great things that God has done in our life to the next generation. In Psalm 145:4, it says, let me read that. Yeah, 145:4 says, "One generation shall praise your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts." So me and Deb, me and your mom, me and your Nana want to talk to you about some of the cool stuff that God has done in our lives. And one of the first things we want to talk about is how we met. We met in Korea, and actually I was supposed to come at a certain time, but I got a deferment and I didn't actually show up at the time that I was supposed to, but something kept us on track to meet. What happened to your dad?
Yeah, so it's a 2-year assignment, and the end of the second year that we were there, because I was there in college, but living with my folks, my dad was offered a command position, which extended us a year. So the year that we were extended was the year that Papa came to Korea.
So we would have missed each other completely, but God had that all set up, which is pretty neat. So I'm standing in a picnic line, a chapel picnic line, and in front of me is Deb's mom, and then her sister, and then her. And she turns around, and I heard a voice in my head that said, "This is the woman that you're gonna marry." And I thought, okay, I'm losing my mind. How can you think that way? And so I immediately left the picnic. Well, after that, I kept running into this beautiful woman that I had heard this voice in my head tell me that I was going to marry. And so I started trying to avoid her. Well, turns out that I saw this young African-American teenager in the snack bar, and he got into a fight, and I noticed that he'd been in chapel. So I took him under my wing, and I was going to start discipling him. Well, one day he said, "Hey, would you like to come over to our house to watch football?" And I said, "Absolutely, I'd love to." And so I came over to his house, and I noticed that this was an African-American teenager with white parents. And I thought that was really interesting. So anyways, I thought, well, okay. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, Deb comes walking in, and I had no clue. So God's even bringing us together through the process of introducing me to her brother in a very wild way. So,
and that was the first night that I remembered meeting him. I didn't remember him at the picnic. I think Betsy remembered him like when we were playing volleyball before we got in line or whatever, but that was actually the first time I met him when he was at the house, because I was taking college courses and they were at night, and so when I got to the house it was kind of late. It was probably like 10:30 or whatever, and anyway, that's the first time I met him.
Yeah. So with all this stuff happening, I was trying to avoid getting to know this gal because I thought I was kind of losing my marbles. And the other thing is that I had just come off a broken engagement, and I didn't want to get involved in a relationship. But this gal was really cute. She was a beautiful woman. I really was in conflict over this. So one day I was talking to another friend that I was discipling, and I told him, I really am having a struggle with avoiding this gal in chapel, and I want you to pray for me that I would stop thinking about her. And we're in the middle of Seoul, Korea. And so anyways, he was asking and trying to figure out who this girl was. And finally, all of a sudden, I must have turned white as a sheet, because he looked at me and then turned around, and here comes Deb with two of her Korean friends in the middle of Seoul. And Kevin turns to me and goes, "Is that the girl?" And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "I'll be praying for you. She's the most godly, available single gal in the chapel. I'll be praying for you." I said, no, not like that. So anyways, it was circumstances like that that kept us, we kept meeting one another over and over again. And so one day I was praying and wrestling with whether or not what to do. And so I was reading in Acts, and in Acts there's a passage where Gamaliel is addressing the rest of the Pharisees about the disciples, and he says, if this is from man, it'll fail, but if it's from God, watch out lest you fight against God. So I took that as my cue that I should ask Deb out, and if it's from God, it'll work. If it's not, it'll fail. So I went over for another football game at their house, and it was my full intent to ask her out on a date sometime during that football game, but I didn't get up the nerve, and so I walked out of the house, and I felt like God was saying, "No, I thought you were going to ask her out." And so I ran all the way to the barracks, keeping my courage intact, picked up the phone immediately and called her, not realizing that it was 11 o'clock at night, and called, and then...
Well, and he had been coming over to the house a lot because he was helping my brother, and so I, had gotten to know him. But we had a lot of single guys in the house, a lot of missionaries. Our home was pretty open, and so there were people in all the time around. So, and my bedroom was the closest to the phone, because this is back when we had landlines, no cell phones. And so I of course, was the one that answered the phone, and it was Chuck, and he's like, "Yeah, so I was thinking that maybe we should go out maybe Friday night." And I'm like, because I had no idea that he was interested in anything. And come to find out later, he'd actually already asked my dad permission to date me, which I didn't know anything about, of course. And
about a month earlier.
Yeah, which is kind of... And the cool part of that was that my dad and I had this contract where if anybody wanted to ask me out, they would have to ask him first for permission, and then I, could, go out with them. But he had, kind of said, "Hey, that contract's no longer in effect. I trust you. You're old enough, But it was kind of cool that Chuck did that. So my mom and dad were impressed from the beginning. But anyway, when he asked if I'd be interested in going out to dinner Friday night, I was kind of like, well, that sounds interesting. But I couldn't really think, because in my mind I was trying to think of a reason why not, because I had been praying the summer prior because my dad had kind of made an announcement to my older brother and I that he didn't think either of us had the gift of celibacy. So I had been praying that God would have guys ask me out. And so, like, a non-Christian guy asked me if I wanted to come hang with his band one time, and I'm like, no. So I'm like, okay, Lord, a Christian guy asked me out. And then this unhealthy at best Christian guy asked me, like, "Hey, I'm getting a paycheck on the 15th. You want to go out to dinner?" And I'm like, okay, no. And now a person who's like serious about their faith, asked me out. And I knew Chuck well enough to know that he was serious about his faith, and that he was a leader, and that he, was helping people and discipling people. And I'd seen that in action with my brother. So I didn't really have any reason to say anything other than, yeah, sure, that sounds interesting. And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell, and this was Tuesday, because we got Monday Night Football on Tuesday night. And so Tuesday through Friday, I'm just like, what is going on? What's happening here? And even to the point where that Friday evening, he was going to come pick me up. I don't remember what the time was, but everybody was gone babysitting, doing activities, and my mom and I were left in the house. And she's like, "Hey, you want me to make you something for dinner?" And I'm like, "No, that's okay." And she kept asking, and she's really good at that. And eventually I said, "Well, I'm actually going to go out to dinner with somebody." And she's like, "Who?" And I'm like, "Well, the guy, Chuck." And she just like, she was so excited when she heard it, which is why I didn't want to say anything during the week. So anyway, Chuck comes over in cowboy boots and jeans, and we went to the Hunters Club, or I don't know, one of the clubs in on Yongsan, and yeah, we had our awkward first date. Super awkward.
But through my times with Jesus and my quiet times and everything that I was reading, all the sermons at chapel, all of them were pointing me very clearly that Deb was the gal that indeed I was supposed to marry. And so God was really making that very clear. But he had to make that very clear to Deb as well. And so Deb had some time in the Word.
Yeah, and I was reading through the Bible in a year at that point. Pretty much every year I was in college. And I was in Numbers. And in Numbers 14, 8 and 9, it says, "If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." And I think, I was really young, and our next door neighbors were getting a divorce, and I kind of had a lot of, I tell people it takes me longer to pick out a pair of shoes than it did for us to get engaged. And so I just had a lot of fear about, is this the right thing? And, is Chuck, is he the one? And I felt like, like Gideon, like I put out a fleece and everything was measured up, but it could be just natural, and then I put out, another test, and then finally I just asked God to show me something I have no doubt in my mind that this is what he wants. This is the mate he has for me to, and I think, Chuck was ready to pop the question in a moment, and I was the one that was kind of, hesitant. And so there's one week where he was going to be out in the field all week. And so I thought, this is a good week to just really petition God and ask him to show me something that didn't involve or come from him, but was a confirmation. And so toward the end of the week, like at the last minute, which is typical, like the night before he got back from the field, I feel like God gave me that confirmation. And so he was going to come have dinner, with the family that evening after he got home or back from the field. And then afterwards, we're at my house, and the whole family disappears and leaves us alone because they know what's coming. And so anyway, I'll let you.
So it was a real awkward proposal because we knew what to do because God had told us what to do. And so I kind of said something like to the effect of, well, there's only one last thing left to do. Will you marry me? And she said, yes. And then we said, well, we probably ought to tell your folks.
And I'm like, you didn't talk to my dad first? Like, wow. Yeah, you better go talk to Dad. So he went back and talked to my dad, and I went back, and my mom and sister were back in her room, and I told them, I'm like, yeah, he asked me to marry him. And they both were jumping up and down like they'd won the game show or something. They were definitely more sanguine about it and excited, which was really a neat thing because I feel like, my family and kind of the whole community was watching this happen. So it was kind of a neat thing. We had a lot of people that were encouraging us and for us and helping us out. And
So we don't recommend it, but I think we were dating for 5 months.
Well, our first date was in November, and then we got engaged, I think, in April, toward the end of April.
Yeah.
And then you left in May to go back to Fort Campbell, and then we intended to get married in September, but we actually ended up getting married in August. So
we were on the fast train. Not recommended, But if God tells you to do it, then you should be obedient and be obedient immediately. And we were. And so we've been married almost 29 years now. This August it'll be 29. And so that's our story. You want to add anything else?
Just, I think one of the things that I think is really cool is we were in Korea, and God worked it out so that we were there at the same time. And so when people say, well, is this going to happen for me? And I just tell them my story. I'm like, hey, I was in the middle of nowhere and God made it happen. So it's not too hard for God to find you, or to bring your mate, around if in his timing and wherever, the circumstances are. So I don't think you're going to miss it or miss out.
And you can still hear the voice of God. He will tell you, even if you don't recognize it at first, He will tell you. So we can hear the voice of God.
And we tell people this is the second most important decision you're going to make in your life is who you're going to marry.
Yeah.
The first most important decision is following Jesus and believing God. But the second most important decision is who you're going to marry, because it really has a big impact on the rest of your life. And we both have been married longer at this point than we were single, and have been for a while. So.
And it's been pretty cool. So all our grandkids, take your time, find the right one. If for some reason you have stumbled upon our little video and you're not in the family, well, there's some good advice
Hopefully
for
you got something good out of it. All right. Thanks a lot. And we'll post another video on some of the crazy stuff that God has done in our life.